I'm Christopher Harris, Environmental Services Supervisor at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Portland, Oregon. Or at least I was until I walked out of that building for the last time 4 weeks ago, leaving behind a career I thought would define the rest of my life. 12 years. That's how long I managed the third shift cleaning crew at one of the Pacific Northwest's busiest trauma centers. I held certifications in biohazard remediation, infection control, and hospital environmental safety protocols that most people have never heard of and never want to. I'd cleaned operating rooms where surgeons fought for 20 consecutive hours to save a life. I'd sanitized isolation units during outbreaks that made the evening news. I'd scrubbed emergency departments after mass casualty events, the kind where you stop counting bodies and start counting hours until you can go home and pretend you didn't see what you saw. Blood soaking through 3 layers of protective flooring. Tuesday, biological waste requiring specialized disposal teams in hazmat suits. Wednesday, rooms so contaminated that even seasoned infectious disease specialists wouldn't enter without full protection. That was just another Friday in my world. I thought I'd seen it all. I thought nothing could shake me anymore. I was wrong. What I'm about to tell you changed everything I believed about the spaces we occupy, the instruments we trust, and the very nature of what we call reality. It's the reason I can't set foot in a hospital anymore without my hands shaking. It's why I wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, remembering rooms that were impossibly cold while every piece of equipment in the building insisted they were perfectly normal. St. Catherine's is a 470-bed teaching hospital in Northwest Portland, right where the city's old industrial heart meets its glossy modern facade. The main building went up in 1953, back when hospitals still looked like institutions rather than luxury hotels. Since then, they've grafted on 6 additional wings, each from a different era, each with its own architectural personality and its own peculiar problems. The third floor, where everything fell apart, houses surgical recovery units and long-term care wards. It still has that distinctive smell that newer hospitals have managed to eliminate. Floor wax mixed with industrial disinfectant, mixed with something else you can never quite place. Something old, something that's seeped into the walls over decades. The hallways up there are wide enough for 2 gurneys to pass comfortably, lined with industrial vinyl flooring in a pale green that was probably meant to be calming, but just looks tired and institutional. The fluorescent lights hum constantly, that particular frequency that you stop consciously hearing after a few hours, but that embeds itself in your skull anyway. My crew worked 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week, 8 of us total. Besides me, there were 2 lead cleaners, Jessica Martinez and Brandon Wilson, and 5 general staff. We had a systematic rotation through every department with specific protocols for each area based on contamination risk, regulatory requirements, and the particular neuroses of whatever department head we were dealing with. You develop a rhythm in this work, a pattern. You know which rooms will be straightforward and which will make you earn your paycheck. October 14th, 2024, Tuesday night sliding into Wednesday morning. The date is burned into my memory now, along with everything that happened after. I clocked in at 10:45 p.m., same as always. Checked the assignment board, reviewed the special attention list with Jessica and Brandon over burnt coffee in disposable cups. We had 3 post-surgical suites needing terminal cleaning, the full decontamination protocol that takes hours and uses enough chemicals to strip paint. 2 patient rooms requiring isolation protocols because of C.diff infections, which meant gowning up and treating everything like it was radioactive, plus the standard nightly maintenance of all public areas and patient corridors, the routine work that keeps a hospital from becoming a biohazard zone. Nothing unusual, nothing to indicate that by dawn, I'd be questioning everything I thought I understood about my profession. Around 1:15 in the morning, my radio crackled. Linda Hartwell, the nursing supervisor on 3 West. We'd worked together for 7 years, long enough that we'd developed a professional shorthand. Christopher, you got a minute? Need to prioritize room 327 if you can. Discharge went out this afternoon, and we've got an ICU transfer coming up that needs the bed by morning. Not an emergency, just a scheduling preference. But Linda had covered for me more times than I could count when I needed flexibility, so I told her we'd handle it within the hour. I assigned it to Tyler Johnson, one of our most reliable cleaners. 8 years at St. Catharines. Knew our protocols cold, never complained, never cut corners, never gave me reason to worry. I was deep into the surgical suite down the hall, the kind of cleaning where you're essentially sterilizing every surface down to the molecular level. So I figured I'd check on his progress in about 30 minutes. Room 327 was standard issue, semi-private configuration, though it had been used as a private room for the past week. The patient records showed an 82-year-old woman named Margaret Chen in for pneumonia complications, 9-day stay, discharged that afternoon to a rehab facility. Routine. Forgettable. The kind of case we handled a dozen times a week. At 1:50 a.m., Tyler appeared in the doorway of the surgical suite. Something was off about his expression. Tyler wasn't the type to get rattled. You can't survive in this job if you are. And he definitely wasn't the type to interrupt someone in the middle of a terminal clean unless it mattered. "Christopher," he said, and his voice had this odd flatness to it. "You need to come look at 327. Something's wrong with it." The way he said wrong made my stomach tighten. Not broken, not weird, wrong. I followed him down the corridor, and that's when I first noticed it. The temperature. The hallway maintained a steady 72 degrees year-round, hospital standard, carefully controlled for patient comfort and infection prevention. But the air coming from room 327 felt different. Colder. Not drastically, but enough that I felt it on my face as we approached. Like walking past an open freezer. "HVAC issue?" I asked, already knowing that wasn't quite right. "That's what I thought," Tyler said. "But check the thermostat." We stepped inside and the temperature difference became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just cool. It was cold enough that I could see my breath forming faint clouds in the air when I exhaled. In October, in Portland, inside a climate-controlled hospital room. I went straight to the thermostat. Digital display, modern unit, replaced hospital-wide just 2 years ago. It read 72 degrees. I held my hand over the nearby vent. Air was flowing, but it wasn't warm or cool, just normal circulation. The system thought everything was fine. "Did you call maintenance?" I asked. "Wanted you to see it first, but Christopher, that's not the only thing." He pointed to the bed. Already stripped, linens removed per protocol. Standard hospital-grade therapeutic mattress covered in medical-grade vinyl, easy to sanitize, designed to prevent bed sores. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, I could see an impression on the mattress surface. Deep, distinct, showing clear outlines of a head, shoulders, torso, hips, legs. Mattresses hold impressions temporarily. That's normal, expected even. Body weight compresses the foam, and it takes time for the material to expand back to its original shape. But this impression was sharper than it should have been. More defined, and it had been 3 hours since the patient was discharged. "Never seen one stay this clear this long," Tyler said, echoing my thought. "And that's not all. Look at the corner." The visitor's chair sat at an odd angle in the far corner, facing slightly away from the bed toward the junction of the walls. On the small table beside it, a cup half filled with water and a folded blanket, arranged with precise care. "Family took everything when they left," Tyler continued. "I confirmed with the floor nurse. They cleaned out all personal items this afternoon. But that blanket, it's not hospital issue. I checked. And that cup," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "That cup was full when I came in 90 minutes ago. I've been watching it. The water level's going down." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Tyler stared back, no humor in his expression whatsoever. "Water evaporates," I said, trying to sound reasonable, trying to be the supervisor who has rational explanations for everything. "Not this fast, not in 90 minutes, and definitely not in a cold room." He had me there. Evaporation slows in cooler temperatures. Basic physics. If anything, that water should have been sitting exactly where he'd first seen it. I walked over and examined the cup more closely. Standard hospital-issue plastic, the kind that lives on every bedside table in every patient room. About half full, maybe slightly less. If it had been completely full 90 minutes ago, that represented significant liquid loss, unnatural liquid loss. "Maybe the floor nurse is wrong about the timing," I suggested. "Maybe family came back to visit. Someone's been in here." Then why isn't there a visitor log? Why didn't anyone at the nurse's station see them come in? He was right. 3 West had clear sight lines to every room entrance. You couldn't get to 327 without passing the nurse's station. If someone had been here, Linda or one of her staff would have seen them. I pulled out my incident log and made notes. Room temperature anomaly, thermostat malfunction possible, unusual mattress impression, unidentified personal items. I told Tyler to continue with the cleaning and that I'd call maintenance to check the HVAC system, standard procedure, rational response, everything by the book. But as I walked back to the surgical suite, something gnawed at me. The cold, the impression, the cup of water slowly emptying itself. Individually, each thing had an explanation. Coincidences happen. Equipment fails. People misremember details. But together they formed a pattern that felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. A wrongness that had nothing to do with contamination or cleaning protocols and everything to do with something I didn't have words for. At 2:30 a.m., I decided to check Tyler's progress. When I reached 327, I found him standing motionless in the doorway, one hand on the frame, staring into the room like he was looking at something I couldn't see. "Tyler!" He didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The water's gone." I looked past him to the table in the corner. The cup sat there completely empty. Not just empty, bone dry, as if it had been empty for hours, maybe days. "You must have knocked it over, or I haven't touched it." He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before in 8 years of working together. Fear, real, unfiltered fear. "I've been cleaning the bathroom for the last 20 minutes. When I came out to check, the cup was empty, dry, like it had never held water at all." The cold hit me as soon as I stepped fully into the room. Worse than before, much worse. Every breath hurt my lungs. I could see Tyler's exhalations forming thick white clouds. The impression on the mattress looked deeper somehow, the outline more pronounced, as if the weight pressing into it had increased rather than decreased over time. I went to the thermostat again. Still reading 72 degrees, I held my hand directly on the sensor. It felt like touching ice. I called maintenance. Rick Paulson answered. Good guy, competent, 23 years on the job. I explained everything. The impossible cold, the thermostat reading that contradicted physical reality, the visible breath condensation. "That's not possible," he said flatly. "The sensors would trigger alerts if there was variance of more than 3 degrees. I'm not showing any alerts for that room. System says it's perfect." "I'm standing in it right now, Rick. I can see my breath coming out in clouds." Silence on the other end. Then, "You're serious. Come see for yourself." He arrived 15 minutes later with a digital thermometer and an infrared sensor. He took readings at 6 different points throughout the room, by the door, by the bed, in the corner, by the window in the bathroom, at the ceiling vent. Every single reading between 51 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit. "But the thermostat says 72, he muttered, staring at his equipment like it had personally betrayed him. "The building management system says 72. Every sensor in my diagnostic panel says this room is at exactly 72 degrees. He spent the next 30 minutes checking everything. HVAC connections, ductwork, thermostat wiring, sensor calibration, airflow rates, pressure differential. He tested and retested. He called up system logs on his tablet. He examined physical components with a flashlight. Everything tested normal. Everything functioned exactly as designed. According to every measurement his equipment could provide, room 327 was at a perfectly comfortable regulation 72 degrees. I'll file a malfunction report," he finally said, packing up his tools with the careful movements of someone trying to maintain professional composure. "But I have no idea what's causing this. The equipment is telling me everything's fine. My thermometer is telling me it's not. Those two things can't both be true, but they are." After he left, Tyler and I stood in the hallway outside 327. Neither of us wanted to go back in. We didn't say that out loud, but we both felt it. "Just finish the cleaning," I told him, trying to sound authoritative. trying to be the supervisor who doesn't let unexplained phenomena interfere with job performance. We'll tag it as unsuitable for patients until maintenance figures out what's going on. Tyler nodded and went back inside. I returned to my surgical suite, trying to focus on decontamination protocols, trying to concentrate on work that made sense. But I kept glancing down the hallway toward 327, toward that doorway that seemed darker than the others somehow, colder, more present. At 3:10 a.m., I heard the crash. I ran toward the sound and found Tyler standing in the middle of room 327, surrounded by the scattered contents of his cleaning cart. Bottles of disinfectant, spray bottles, towels, equipment, everything spread across the floor in a wide radius, like the cart had exploded rather than simply tipped over. I barely touched it, Tyler said, and his hands were shaking, actually shaking. I swear, Christopher, I barely brushed against it, and the whole thing just went over, like something pushed it. I helped him gather everything, noting that his breathing was rapid and shallow. Tyler had cleaned this hospital for 8 years. He'd handled every kind of mess, every variety of horror that the human body can produce. I'd never seen him rattled, not once. Take your break early, I said. Go get coffee. Clear your head. I'll finish this room myself. You sure? Yeah, go. After he left, I stood alone in room 327. The cold had intensified to the point where it felt less like temperature and more like presence. Like the room itself was exhaling ice directly into my lungs. The mattress impression remained impossibly sharp and deep. And now I noticed something new. The window blind was moving, just slightly, a gentle, rhythmic swaying, as if disturbed by a breeze. But the windows in this wing didn't open. They were sealed units, had been since the renovation in 2015. There was no breeze. There couldn't be a breeze. I walked to the window and held my hand near the blind. Nothing. No air movement at all. But the blind continued its subtle motion, back and forth, keeping time with something I couldn't perceive. I decided I was overthinking it. Old buildings settle. They have quirks, vibrations from equipment, from the ventilation system, from traffic on the street below. All of it creates imperceptible movements that can manifest in strange ways. There had to be rational explanations for everything I was observing. There had to be. I spent the next 45 minutes completing the terminal clean. I wiped every surface with hospital-grade disinfectant. I mopped the floors twice with quaternary ammonium solution. I sanitized the bathroom until it gleamed. I changed the privacy curtain. I prepared the bed with fresh linens, pulled tight according to the precise hospital corner method they'd taught me 12 years ago. By 4 a.m., the room was clinically clean, ready for inspection, perfect by every metric we use to measure such things. But it was still impossibly, unbearably cold. I was documenting everything in my shift log when Jessica Martinez's voice crackled over my radio. Christopher, need you at 3:49 when you get a chance. I've got something similar to what Tyler was describing. My stomach dropped. Similar how? Temperature's way off, really off. And there's this impression on the mattress that you should just come look. Room 349 was at the opposite end of the third floor hallway, mirror layout to 327. When I arrived, Jessica was standing outside with her arms crossed tight against her body, despite the hallway being its usual comfortable temperature. Patient discharged yesterday afternoon, she said. 89-year-old man, stroke recovery. Room's been empty for almost 24 hours, but it feels like someone's been here, like someone's still here. The temperature in 349 was identical to 327, low 50s at most, despite the thermostat confidently displaying 72 degrees. The mattress bore that same impossible impression, deep, distinct, sharp-edged, showing the clear outline of a human form. Jessica, I said carefully, did anyone mention Margaret Chen to you, the patient from 327? No, why? Can you do me a favor? Check the nursing station records. I want to know everything about the patient who was in this room, and check if there's any connection to Margaret Chen. She went to the nurse's station while I examined the room more carefully. On the bedside table, a cup of water, 3/4 full. I pulled out my phone, took a photo with timestamp, and set it on the table where I could monitor the water level. Jessica returned 20 minutes later with a printout of patient records, her expression troubled. Okay, this is strange. The patient from this room was Harold Chen. The patient from 327 was Margaret Chen. They were married 68 years according to the admission notes. The cold seemed to intensify around me. They were here at the same time? Not exactly. Harold was admitted October 2nd with a stroke. Moved to rehab October 13th, yesterday. Margaret was admitted October 5th with pneumonia. She was discharged yesterday too, October 14th, about 4 hours after Harold was transferred. The notes say, she paused reading, the notes say she refused to leave until she knew he was settled at the rehab facility. She was medically clear to go, but insisted on staying until she got confirmation he was okay. I looked at the photo I'd taken of the water cup. 20 minutes had passed. The water level had dropped by at least a quarter. We both stared at it. Did anyone die in these rooms? I asked. Recently? Ever? Jessica scrolled through the records on her tablet. No. Both patients are alive. Harold's at Riverside Rehabilitation Center. Margaret's there with him now. Both stable. Both doing fine. Then why? I stopped myself. Why what? Why were their empty rooms impossibly cold? Why did impressions of their bodies remain on mattresses hours after they left? Why was water disappearing from cups in empty rooms while we watched? I didn't finish the question because I didn't want to hear myself ask it. I called Rick Paulson back. He returned with 2 other maintenance technicians, Andrew Peterson and David Mitchell, both veterans with decades of experience. They brought more equipment, multiple thermometers, hygrometers, thermal imaging cameras, airflow meters, electromagnetic field detectors. Every reading confirmed what we felt. Both rooms were far colder than they should be, measuring in the low 50s, while the building management system insisted they were at precisely 72 degrees. It's like the system can't see what's actually happening in these spaces, Rick said, staring at his tablet screen with something close to desperation. The sensors are working. The readings are consistent, but they're wrong. They're all wrong. I've been doing this for 23 years, and I've never encountered anything like this. By 5 a.m., Brandon Wilson radioed from the other side of the floor. He'd encountered the same phenomenon in room 338. Same impossible cold, same persistent mattress impression, same slowly emptying cup of water. I checked the patient records myself this time. Room 338 had housed Eleanor Vance, admitted for observation after a fall, discharged October 13th. I pulled up her full file. Next of kin, Margaret Chen, relationship daughter, 3 rooms, 3 family members, Harold Chen, his wife Margaret, her mother Eleanor, all admitted within days of each other, all discharged within a 36-hour window, all exhibiting identical, impossible environmental anomalies in the rooms they'd left behind. I gathered my entire crew in the break room at 5:30 a.m., 8 of us sitting around that battered table, drinking coffee that had gone cold, nobody wanting to say out loud what we were all thinking. "We should call someone," Tyler finally said. "This isn't right. This isn't normal." "Call who?" I asked. "And tell them what? 3 rooms have temperature control issues? Maintenance already knows. They can't explain it either." "It's more than that," Jessica said quietly. "You know it's more than that, Christopher." She was right. It wasn't just the cold or the mattress impressions or the water. It was the totality of it. The family connection, the timing, the way these rooms felt. And I hated that word, felt, because it wasn't scientific or professional or based on anything measurable. But there was no other word for it. These rooms felt occupied. They felt watched. They felt like something was maintaining a vigil in them, waiting for something, holding space for something. At 6:15 a.m., as dawn light began filtering through the east-facing windows, I did one final check of all 3 rooms. The temperature in each had returned to normal. The mattress impressions had faded to barely noticeable indentations. The cups were empty and dry. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the past 5 hours had been some kind of collective hallucination. Except we had the documentation. We had Rick's readings. We had photos and timestamps and multiple witnesses who'd all seen the same impossible things. I filed an incident report documenting every environmental anomaly, every maintenance call, every equipment reading that contradicted observable reality. I noted the family connections, but avoided speculation about causes because speculation would require me to acknowledge possibilities I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I forwarded everything to the day shift supervisor, to the facilities manager, to the nursing director. I made sure there was a paper trail. I covered my ass professionally because that's what 12 years of institutional work teaches you to do. Over the next week, building services tore apart the HVAC system for the entire third floor. They replaced sensors, they recalibrated thermostats, they checked ductwork and pressure differentials and airflow rates. They brought in outside consultants who specialized in hospital environmental systems. They found nothing wrong. Everything functioned perfectly. Every component tested within normal parameters. I started researching St. Catherine's history during my downtime. The building had been constructed on the site of an old tuberculosis sanatorium that operated from 1897 to 1949. That facility had been demolished, but portions of the foundation had been incorporated into the new construction for structural and cost reasons. Thousands of people had died in that sanatorium over 5 decades. Thousands of people had taken their last breaths on the ground where I now mop floors and sanitize surfaces. I didn't know what to do with that information. I'm a hospital sanitation supervisor, not a paranormal investigator. I believe in infection control protocols and CDC guidelines, not ghost stories. I trust thermometers and disinfectants and procedures that can be measured, documented, repeated, but I couldn't deny what I'd experienced, what my entire crew had witnessed and documented. Rooms that were measurably, impossibly cold while every sensor insisted otherwise. Water disappearing from cups no one touched. Mattress impressions that persisted far beyond any physical explanation. A family of 3 leaving behind something that lingered in their rooms long after their bodies had gone. The rooms returned to normal use. Patients were assigned to 327, 349, and 338. None of them reported anything unusual. The temperatures stayed stable. The HVAC system functioned flawlessly. Everything was fine. Except I couldn't enter those rooms without feeling it. Not the physical cold. The environmental temperature was always normal now. Something else. A psychological cold. A sense of presence that I couldn't name and didn't want to acknowledge. Like walking into a space where something profound had happened and left its mark in ways that thermometers couldn't measure and protocols couldn't clean away. I found myself researching the Chen family, Eleanor Vance. I learned they'd all been discharged to Riverside Rehabilitation Center. They were together, the family unit intact. Harold recovering from his stroke. Margaret recovering from pneumonia. Eleanor being monitored after her fall. Maybe that mattered. Maybe that was why the phenomena stopped. Maybe whatever had been keeping vigil in those rooms, whatever had manifested in dropped temperatures and lingering impressions and slowly draining cups, had dissipated once it knew they were all safe, all together, all accounted for. Or maybe I was constructing narratives to make sense of something fundamentally senseless. Maybe I was doing what human brains do when confronted with the inexplicable, inventing meaning, creating stories, imposing order on chaos. But the readings were real, the measurements were real, the documentation was real. 3 weeks after that night, I submitted my resignation letter. I told administration I'd received a better offer from a private sector company. I told my crew I needed a change after 12 years, that it was time for something new. I told my wife I wanted better hours, wanted to see daylight again, wanted to be home for dinner. All of those things were partially true. None of them were the real reason. The real reason was that I couldn't continue working in a building where I'd witnessed the complete failure of every rational framework I'd spent 12 years constructing. I'm trained to understand physical spaces, to control contamination through measurable, repeatable processes, to create sterile, safe environments using procedures grounded in chemistry and biology and physics. What happened in those 3 rooms defied every principle I'd ever learned. The temperature was objectively wrong, and all our instruments insisted it was objectively right. Matter disappeared in ways that violated thermodynamics. Physical impressions persisted in ways that contradicted material science. And the instruments, the thermostats and sensors and building management systems we trusted to tell us the truth about our environment, they lied. or they were blind, or reality itself had temporarily shifted in ways our equipment wasn't designed to detect. Any of those possibilities destroyed my ability to trust my own profession. My crew tried to convince me to stay. Jessica said I was overreacting to equipment malfunctions that would eventually be explained. Brandon suggested we'd all been tired, that fatigue had distorted our perceptions. Tyler didn't say anything, but I saw in his eyes that he understood. He'd felt it too. He knew. I think about Harold and Margaret Chen often. Married 68 years, separated by hospital logistics and medical necessity for 9 days. Margaret refusing to leave until she knew Harold was safe, maintaining her vigil even as pneumonia weakened her body. Eleanor, Margaret's mother, in a room down the hall, the 3 generations of family scattered across the same floor, connected by blood and history and something stronger than either. I wonder if some part of that vigil continued even after their physical bodies left the building. If love, maintained over decades, becomes something more than emotion. If it can manifest in measurable ways, dropping temperatures, leaving impressions, slowly draining water from cups while hospital employees watch with instruments that insist nothing unusual is happening. But that's not a scientific explanation. That's poetry. That's mythology. That's the kind of thinking that has no place in a hospital where everything is supposed to be quantifiable and controllable and explicable. I now work for a commercial cleaning company that handles office buildings and retail spaces. The work is straightforward. Temperatures match thermostat readings, floors stay clean, surfaces respond predictably to cleaning agents. Matter behaves according to known physical laws. My instruments tell me the truth about the spaces I'm responsible for maintaining. Sometimes clients ask why someone with my qualifications and experience left hospital work for something less prestigious, less challenging, less important. I tell them I wanted better hours, which is true. I tell them I wanted to see my family more, which is also true. I don't mention that I can no longer trust my own perception when instruments contradict what I directly observe. I don't explain that I've developed a fundamental uncertainty about the nature of physical space and what might linger in places after we leave them. The night supervisor who replaced me is named Kevin Roberts, 15-year veteran at St. Catherine's, competent, thorough, unflappable. I ran into him at a supply conference last month. He mentioned that room 327 occasionally has temperature control issues that maintenance can't quite pin down. Comes and goes, he said. Nothing major, probably old building settling. You know how it is? I nodded. I didn't tell him what I knew. What would be the point? He's functioning perfectly well in a role I couldn't continue. Maybe some people are better equipped to work in spaces where the impossible occasionally intrudes without ceremony or explanation. Maybe they can catalog anomalies, file reports, and continue their duties without losing faith in the fundamental reliability of observable reality. I couldn't do that. Once you've watched water disappear from a cup while every physical principle says it shouldn't, once you've measured a room at 53 degrees while the thermostat insists it's 72, once you've felt the presence of something that shouldn't be there and can't be there but undeniably is there. Once all of that happens, you can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. When I walk past hospitals now, I wonder about the rooms inside. How many contain echoes of the people who occupied them? How many environmental anomalies are dismissed as equipment failures because the alternative is too disturbing to seriously consider? How many cleaning crews have encountered what my team did, documented it carefully, and then watched the evidence disappear as mysteriously as it appeared? How many supposedly empty rooms aren't quite as empty as we need them to be? I sleep better now without the third shift destroying my circadian rhythm. My work is predictable and manageable. But sometimes in that liminal space between waking and sleeping, I feel cold air that shouldn't exist. I see impressions in foam that should have faded hours ago. I watch water levels drop in cups no one is drinking from. And I remember that for 9 days, an 82-year-old woman named Margaret Chen refused to leave a hospital until she knew her husband of 68 years was safe. I remember that her mother was down the hall, that 3 generations of family were scattered across that floor, connected by bonds that hospitals try to accommodate, but can never fully honor. I remember that love, maintained over decades, creates its own gravity, its own weight, its own physical presence that might not register on our instruments but exists nonetheless. I remember that our equipment only measures what it's designed to measure, and the spaces between those measurements might contain truths we're not equipped to quantify, control, or even acknowledge without losing our grip on the rational frameworks that allow us to function. I don't work in hospitals anymore, but I think about those 3 rooms on the 3rd floor of St. Catherine's Medical Center. I think about Harold Chen and Margaret Chen and Eleanor Vance, all together now at Riverside Rehabilitation Center, their family unit preserved and intact. And I think about what they left behind in those rooms during their stay. Something that made the temperature drop 20 degrees while every sensor insisted nothing had changed. Something that pressed itself into mattress foam with impossible persistence. Something that drank water from cups in empty rooms while my crew and I watched, helpless and uncomprehending, while our instruments told us we were imagining things that we absolutely were not imagining. I spent 12 years learning to clean hospitals, to eliminate contamination, to make spaces safe through systematic application of proven protocols grounded in chemistry and biology. But that night taught me something I never wanted to know. Some kinds of presence can't be cleaned away. Some impressions persist beyond any physical explanation. Some spaces retain echoes of their occupants in ways that defy our instruments and mock our confidence in measurable reality. I walked away because I'd lost faith in the fundamental premise of my profession, that we understand and control the environments we're responsible for maintaining, that our instruments tell us the truth, that physical space behaves according to predictable, rational principles. I left because I'd learned, beyond any possibility of doubt, that we don't understand nearly as much as we think we do. And every night since, I wonder how many other professionals in how many other fields have encountered similar impossible phenomena. How many have documented anomalies that shouldn't exist? How many have watched their instruments tell them everything is normal while their direct experience screams otherwise? How many have been forced to choose between their careers and their sanity, between institutional credibility and personal integrity? How many have chosen to ignore what they witnessed because acknowledging it would require abandoning everything they thought they understood about how the world works? I couldn't make that choice. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen, measured what I'd measured, felt what I'd felt. So I walked away from 12 years of expertise and credentials and professional relationships. I gave up a career I'd built carefully and methodically because the alternative was continuing to work in spaces where reality occasionally fails to behave according to its own rules, and where our instruments are either lying to us or blind to dimensions of existence we haven't developed the capacity to measure. I still don't have an explanation for what happened that night. I probably never will. The official record shows equipment malfunctions that were never resolved. The unofficial truth is that something impossible occurred in 3 rooms on the 3rd floor of St. Catherine's Medical Center, witnessed by 8 trained professionals, documented with multiple instruments, and then dismissed because acknowledging it would require too many people to question too many fundamental assumptions. But I know what I saw, what my crew saw, what our thermometers and sensors simultaneously confirmed and denied. And I know with absolute certainty that I will never again trust any space to be as empty as it appears. The world is stranger than our instruments can measure. Reality is more complicated than our protocols acknowledge. And sometimes, rarely, but sometimes the impossible intrudes on the everyday in ways that force you to choose between your career and your sanity. I chose sanity. I chose to trust my own experience over what the equipment insisted was true. I chose to walk away from a profession I loved because continuing would have required me to deny what I knew to be real. And late at night, when I can't sleep, when I'm lying there in the dark thinking about those 3 rooms, I wonder if Kevin Roberts has noticed anything yet. I wonder if the temperatures have dropped again. If new patients have been discharged and left behind the same impossible impressions, the same vigils that our instruments can't detect, but that every human instinct screams are there. I wonder if he's felt it yet. That moment when everything you've built your professional identity on suddenly becomes unreliable. When the instruments you've trusted for years tell you one thing while your own senses insist on another. When you're forced to choose between institutional credibility and personal truth. I haven't told anyone the full story. Not really. My wife knows I left because I was burned out, which is true enough. My new colleagues know I wanted a change of pace, which is also technically accurate. But nobody knows about the water that disappeared while we watched. Nobody knows about the thermometers that read 72 while our breath formed clouds in air that felt like winter. Nobody knows that I still have the photos on my phone, timestamps and water levels and thermal readings that shouldn't exist. I keep them backed up in 3 different places, like evidence of something I can't quite name. Sometimes I look at them late at night just to remind myself I didn't imagine it, that it really happened. Last week I drove past St. Catharines on my way to a job site. I didn't mean to. I've been carefully avoiding that part of Portland for a month. But construction forced a detour, and suddenly there it was. The building looked exactly the same. Solid, institutional, permanent. People were walking in and out of the main entrance. Ambulances sat in the emergency bay. Life continued the way it always does. I wondered if anyone was in room 327 at that moment, if they were comfortable, if the temperature felt right to them, if they noticed anything unusual about the space they were occupying. I wondered if they could feel what I'd felt, that sense of something maintaining a presence, keeping watch, holding space for reasons our rational minds can't quite grasp. Probably not. Most people don't notice these things. Most people trust that thermostats tell the truth and that empty rooms are actually empty. Most people move through the world with a confidence in physical reality that I've lost and will probably never regain. I used to be one of those people. I used to believe that hospital environmental services was a purely technical field. Chemistry and biology and protocol. Quantifiable, controllable, rational. Now I know better. Now I know that our instruments measure only what they're designed to measure, that our protocols address only the contamination we've learned to recognize, that our understanding of physical space is probably far more limited than we're comfortable admitting. And I know that love, the kind that persists for 68 years, the kind that connects 3 generations of family, the kind that refuses to leave until it knows everyone is safe, might be more than just emotion or sentiment. It might be something that has weight, temperature, presence, something that can leave impressions that persist long after the physical body has moved on. Something real enough to drop room temperatures by 20 degrees while every sensor in the building insists nothing has changed. I don't know if that's what happened in those 3 rooms. I don't know if Harold and Margaret Chen and Eleanor Vance somehow left behind pieces of themselves, fragments of their vigil, echoes of their devotion. I don't know if consciousness or love or whatever you want to call it can manifest in ways that thermometers struggle to measure, but human beings can clearly feel. I just know that something happened, something impossible, something that 8 trained professionals witnessed and documented and then watched disappear as inexplicably as it had appeared. And I know that I couldn't continue working in a place where that was possible. My new job is fine. It's actually better than fine in a lot of ways. Better hours, better pay, less exposure to bodily fluids and infectious diseases. I clean office lobbies and retail spaces and the occasional restaurant. Everything behaves predictably. Surfaces get dirty and then clean. Temperatures match thermostats. Water stays in cups unless someone drinks it or spills it. It's boring. It's safe. It's exactly what I need right now. But sometimes I miss the intensity of hospital work, the sense of purpose, the knowledge that what you're doing matters, that your protocols and procedures are literally preventing infections and saving lives. There was dignity in that work, even when it was disgusting. There was meaning in it. I gave that up because 3 rooms on a single floor violated every principle I'd built my career on, because water disappeared and temperatures lied, and something impossible happened that I witnessed with my own eyes and documented with calibrated instruments. Was that an overreaction? Should I have just filed the reports, let maintenance puzzle over it, and continued doing my job? Maybe, probably. Most people would have. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stayed, I'd encounter it again. That impossible cold, that sense of presence, that moment when your instruments insist everything is normal, while your every instinct screams that something is profoundly wrong. And next time, I might not be able to pretend it was just equipment failure. Next time, I might have to acknowledge what it actually was, whatever it actually was. And that acknowledgement would destroy whatever fragments of professional certainty I had left. So I left first, before it could happen again, before I had to face that choice between career and sanity one more time. Jessica Martinez calls me occasionally. We get coffee sometimes, talk about the industry, avoid discussing that night. But last week she mentioned that Tyler Johnson had put in his notice. 21 days from now, he'll be done at St. Catharines. She didn't say why. She didn't have to. I wonder how many of us will eventually leave. How many members of that third shift crew will find reasons to move on, to seek employment in facilities where rooms behave predictably and instruments tell the truth? How many will carry with us the knowledge of what we witnessed, never quite able to articulate it to anyone who wasn't there? How many will spend the rest of our careers, in whatever field we end up in, wondering if every empty space is actually empty, if every temperature reading is actually accurate, if the physical world is actually as solid and reliable as we've been taught to believe? I don't have answers. I just have questions that keep me awake at night and photos on my phone that document the impossible. And I have the memory of standing in room 327 at 4 a.m. on October 15th, 2024, watching my breath form clouds in air that every instrument insisted was 72 degrees, feeling the presence of something that shouldn't have been there but undeniably was, and realizing in that moment that everything I thought I knew about my profession was incomplete at best and fundamentally wrong at worst. That's what I carry with me now, that knowledge, that uncertainty, that understanding that the world is stranger and more complicated than our instruments can measure or our protocols can address. And the question that haunts me most isn't about what happened in those 3 rooms. It's about how many other rooms, in how many other hospitals, in how many other buildings across the world contain similar echoes and impressions and impossible phenomena that we've all agreed to ignore because acknowledging them would require too many people to question too many comfortable certainties. How many empty spaces aren't actually empty? How many cold rooms register as warm on our thermostats? How many vigils continue long after the people keeping them have moved on to other places? I don't work in hospitals anymore. I probably never will again. But I'll never forget those 3 rooms on the 3rd floor of St. Catharines Medical Center, or the family who occupied them, or the impossible cold that lingered after they left. And I'll never again trust a thermostat that tells me a room is 72 degrees when I can see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. Because I've learned that our instruments sometimes lie, or worse, that reality sometimes operates according to principles our instruments were never designed to measure. And once you know that, once you've witnessed it firsthand and documented it with calibrated equipment, you can never quite look at the world the same way again. You can never quite trust that what you're seeing is all there is to see. And you can never quite convince yourself that the empty room you're standing in is actually completely, truly empty. That's why I left. That's why I'll never go back. And that's why, late at night when I can't sleep, I still wonder what's happening in those 3 rooms right now. And whether anyone else has noticed that something impossible is still there, keeping watch, maintaining its vigil in the cold spaces between what our instruments can measure and what our hearts know to be true.